Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. I'm Scott. We are doing the Stephen King short story countdown, ranking all of his short stories, 150 total, including all his published complete works. He has several short stories that are partial stories. He has many stories that were published in an unpaid format at the time they were first published. Those ones I am not including, just ones that were published for uh, financial gain, whether in a magazine or in a collection or both. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we do get started, usually I do these every other week. I go back and forth between the Stephen King short story rankings and the 5 Year Battle P.G. Wodehouse. I'm a behind on PG Wodehouse because I have to finish some books before I can go further. And all the books that I need to finish are like this 20-year period. So I have two books I need to finish for the next one, and they should be easy to get to. They're just, they're in a book with font that I don't enjoy. And this is the only way that I can get them without paying a lot of money for something that has better fonts. So that's why I'm doing another Stephen King one after last week. Hopefully, next week will be PG Wodehouse, but there is a possibility that there won't be. If not, I have read all the Stephen King stories. If I can't do the PG Wodehouse one, I will do another Stephen King one next. But let's go ahead and get started. We are doing stories 65 through 61 this week. There are 115 stories to rank. 65 through 61, we're getting into decent stories. We have had horrible stories, Man with a Belly, among others, and then we have had bad stories with maybe a glimpse of something in them. And then we have had stories that, quite honestly, were just either should have been a novella or the King curse is he didn't really have an ending. I don't necessarily see that as a problem as many other people do when it comes to novels, but I do see it when it comes to short story. Short story number 65, I can finally bring this book up because it has been published now in You Like It Darker, is The Turbulence Expert. Of course, that was published in a collection this year, 2024. It was first published in 2018 in the story collection Flight or Fright, which was edited by Stephen King. I don't know the full details of it, although I probably read it at some point, probably back in 2018 when it came out. But I will say, and I mentioned this in the You Like It Darker review that I did, it seems like he wrote the story for the book. I have to write a story about air travel, so I'm forcing myself to do it. That's kind of what it feels like. Craig Dixon is a turbulence expert. Basically, he gets on planes and he deals with turbulence, working for some shadow organization that basically is there to prevent crashes. Uh, the shadow organization, from what information we get from Craig, is doing good, but isn't necessarily a good organization. And it's basically about his daily life and then also him trying to recruit people to become turbulence experts. And if he does so, that takes time off of him. It's an interesting idea, but it does feel like it was forced. Uh, Craig Dixon is not a typical Stephen King character there's not really any substance to him. He is his job, which, I mean, yes, there are people like that, but he just doesn't work as a Stephen King character for me. It's not awful, but I think when I ranked the stories and You Like It Darker, it was either ranked 10th or ninth out of 12 stories. So it wasn't the worst, but it was in the bottom half. Story number 64 is published in Skeleton Crew, and this may be possibly a controversial one. I don't know because, well, I think this story is well known, perhaps infamous. It, well, I think this story is well known, in fact, infamous. Well, I think the story is well known, indeed infamous. I don't know that it is particularly well liked. I feel like it may be, but I'm not sure. It is Survivor type. It was first published in the anthology Terrors, published in 1982, and then in Skeleton Crew in 1985. It is about a Richard Pine who is a doctor. He is a disgraced doctor. He is not a good man. He ends up on an island, and basically, there's very little to survive on there. So he kind of does a little Donner Party on himself and cannibalizes himself in a way. And it's basically him keeping a journal of this, and we get to see his physical and mental decline as this happens. Richard Pine is obviously not a good guy. I don't think he's particularly a good character. He is a criminal, and I've talked about King's past with criminals, how they are not, particularly when it comes to mafia like characters, which isn't necessarily him, but uh, just the criminal, I don't think is King's best work. I think the story doesn't rank higher because after you read it, you know what happens. It doesn't have rereadability factor for me. I don't go back and reread this and get impacted the same way as I did the first time I read it. First time I read it, which was when I was a teenager, I was like, holy shit. But then when I reread it, it's like, well, I know what's going to happen. And I know what's going to happen in every book I reread. But there are books and stories that I reread that still impact me greatly, if not sometimes even more upon reread. This is not the case. When I reread the story, I think I lose a little bit each time, and it's just it if it's your first time reading it, you will probably be wowed by it. My suggestion, if you're anything like me, is just make that your one read. Don't reread it again. There's no reason to. Diminishing returns. Short story number 63 is published in Everything's Eventual. It is maybe another controversial pick. I don't feel like it is, but I will explain why. It is The Man in the Black Suit, originally published in 1994 in New Yorker Magazine. It won an O. Henry Award. Well, what else? Oh, it won a World Fantasy Award. It is basically old man looking back on his time when he was a kid, when he ran into somebody that he believed was the devil. Now, the reason it ranks so low for me is that it's somebody dealing with their mortality, dealing with the dark side of perhaps afterlife, dealing with evil. And I think King has done all of these better. Dealing with mortality, true, it was published after, but The Green Mile does it better than this. Uh, we have seen versions of the devil in Needful Things better than this. Uh, Facing death, nostalgia, looking back on one's youth, he has done this better in many other works. If I read this, as apparently the people who do the O. Henry Awards did, and don't know who it was by, and are not used to Stephen King's work, I guess maybe I would say this is a good story. To me, it's a story that's in his wheelhouse and that he's done better. So it's a decent story. Problem is that I look at it from the view of like, I've seen you do better. So this one's like, hey, cool. But knowing that it won awards kind of makes me expect more from it. And it's not more. It's a fine story, but it's nowhere near his best. Short story number 62 was published in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. It is The End of the Whole Mess, originally published in Omni magazine in 1986, then collected in Nightmares and Dreamscapes, I believe in 1992, 1993. Collected in Nightmares and Dreamscapes in 1993. It is another story that's kind of narrated in journal form, like Survivor Type. That's the similarities between the two stories are done right there. About a man, Howard Forney, is that right? Yes. Whose brother Bobby is a genius and comes up with a formula to reduce the aggressive tendencies of people. As with almost all scientific experiments, it has unintended consequences, and basically the story is telling of those consequences. Uh, it is kind of written in a way that has some similarity to Flowers for Algernon. It is fine. It's another end of the world thing. I think he has done better, obviously, because we do have the Stand. He has certainly done worse, Graduation Afternoon. Uh, this is good. I like it when I read it, but I don't always remember it after I read it. So when I read it, it's like, good story. But then if you go, hey, what stories in Nightmares and Dreamscapes did you like? It's not one that automatically comes to mind. There's nothing really bad about it, but it just doesn't have a lot of memorability to it. Short story number 61 was also published in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. It is My Pretty Pony, which was originally published in a collector's edition, I believe for a museum. It's basically uh, somebody reflecting on his time as a youth with his grandfather, reflecting on the meaning of time, basically, which is the My Pretty Pony. It was written as part of a larger novel that King ended up uh, not completing. It was going to be a crime novel, or at least where this person is reflecting on this. He is at a wedding, I believe, waiting to assassinate somebody. I believe he's a hitman. Now this isn't in the story itself. This is just background on the story, on the novel. Uh, so knowing what we know about how I feel about Stephen King and crime, I'm glad this book wasn't completed. The story is fine. King does nostalgia. He does flashbacks, which this one is pretty much a flashback that's not indicated as a flashback. He does those great. I just don't think overall as a story, which it wasn't originally intended to be, that it stands as well on its own. If it were part of a novel and it wasn't part of a novel that I know I probably wouldn't like very much, I think it worked very well. I just think it's an excerpt of something that I would enjoy, but it doesn't stand very well on its own. Still good writing, interesting characters. And I'm glad that I was able to read it. It didn't get lost in this novel. And if anybody wants to give me one of these collector's edition, which I haven't looked up, but I assume probably cost a lot of money, probably thousands upon thousands of dollars. But if you want, you let me know. You comment to me, and I will give you an address to send it to. But uh, next week we do next week or the week after, depending on if I finish the Woodhouse books. Do story 60 through 56. We will hit the, I guess, 57.5. Story 57.5 will be our halfway point. So I think we're doing pretty good because we haven't even hit the halfway point yet, and we're talking about decent stories. Decent, not good, not great, but hey, when you still have 60 stories left and you know every one of them is going to be decent to great, that's a pretty good mark. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment. I'll talk to you next time.